Ladies and gentlemen, it's heartwarming to see this conference room full after lunch. Anyway, almost full. I would like to introduce our next panelist, who's a dear friend. Not only is he a prince, but he's a scholar and really a gentleman. And when I say prince, yes, it is by lineage, but also more important, he is a prince by his courage, his values, his kindness, and his modesty. He has actively participated over the last 40 years in building the Saudi Arabia we know today. He is twice a pioneer in helping establish the kingdom's powerful industrial infrastructure, and a pioneer in opening the kingdom's market to foreign investment. An engineer by training, he believes in hard work and liberal economics. He was the chairman of the Royal Commission of Jubail and Yambur and the first governor and founder of SAGIA, the Saudi Investment Authority. And until recently, he was the ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to Washington. I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing His Highness Abdullah bin Faisal bin Turkey Al Saud. تفضل طويلا.
Good morning. Thank you for the very kind introduction.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I could pick on it, but there's
Not
no
now.
time.
Not now. Not now. I pick on you now.
You're very kind. I think you've been so nice to compensate me for the fact that I didn't expect you to do this with me. I was hoping maybe Hala Shopani might have been.
Oh, come on.
But anyway, next time I'll make conditions.
Highness, let's get into the depth of things. SAGIA, that you established, you spent a lot of time basically putting the basis of liberalizing the business policies of Saudi Arabia, of pushing for privatization. The rumor is that you resigned because you were frustrated. Can you elaborate on your experience there?
Well, I mean, frustration should not be a reason for leaving things. Otherwise, I would have left many things, including my kids. Basically, I think people thought when they were going through nominations to establish SAGIA after the introduction of the Saudi foreign investment law was they thought what please tell me if the voice goes. They thought that the billions of foreign investment that came to the industrial areas of Jubail and Yambo, those who don't know, on the Gulf and on the Red Sea, were because of my promotional prowess or capabilities. You really didn't need to do anything. They came, the big players in energy, and particularly petrochemicals and huge refineries, was because one is the infrastructure which we built from scratch, very well designed, very well thought of, and quite innovative, first of its kind. The other one was the price of gas, local gas, and of course the way the investments were structured, 50-50, no upper hand or lower hand. Now on SAGIA, we had foreign investment like in Jubail and Yamba and other things, but they were by invitation, by technology, by know-how, not FDI, the classical model for walk-in investors. Now, I came from the side of infrastructure, specific things, government funding, a lot of freedom, very special powers, a lot of backing from our first chairman, who became king later, King Fahd. He was second deputy prime minister when the Royal Commission was set up, and when the gas gathering program was approved, and when SABIC was set up. And anyway, so I said, what are we going to do? Apply, of course, the law. In Saudi Arabia, you cannot do something like this unless you go through the process of drafting a law that then goes to the Shura and government departments participate in. Now, many people in the bureaucracy thought, let's do like Singapore or Malaysia but Saudi Arabia was different. They were different. I was excited by the qualitative benefits of foreign investors, but also a lot of Saudi institutions, public or private, never had the experience of actually doing things like FDI operators in a lot of things, particularly utilities and similar. So basically I had to learn from scratch, what do investors want? What do economic players want? And I reached the conclusion very quickly that if we're going to do anything useful, it is really to build, or I should say to improve the atmosphere and the environment for doing business for economic players, and to try to remove obstacles. This, I thought, was the main task. SAGIA was really one that was policy-oriented, working on other departments' policies. And I basically failed really to make a big impact on government departments, and I felt maybe somebody with better skills should come and do it. This is why.
But Your Highness, you gave more than 2,000 licenses when you were governor of Sagia. So
if you want numbers, I can give you many numbers.
Okay.
It's not the numbers, it is the principle. And actually, funnily enough, Zahir, we found the obstacles were the same also for local businessmen. And it's just we've never had an experience where we need to go and open the door and say, come in. People were targeted to bring, by the business community and the government, to do certain things, bringing technology, buying technology. And so I immediately found that each country should look at its own situation. But if you do not have the atmosphere suitable, it will be very unbalanced. I don't like the idea of programs or projects. Projects and programs should not lead development, economic or otherwise. You have to have, another thing we learned is that you have to, if you want to introduce anything, could be watermelons or rockets or whatever, you have to make sure you do it for small, medium and large enterprises or players. Otherwise, again, it will be unbalanced. You do it for one reason, but you also see if you can make it suitable for all these, because it has to come right across the board.
But Your Highness, the Jubail and Yamba was a program, was government-led, was humongous, and it was a major success.
I agree, but it was for specific things where you had a clear advantage, and that is, fossilized natural resources. Now, we learned a few things. I personally was running around like Don Quixote. Everybody was laughing at me and saying, what is this? What is he saying? I used to go around saying, if you do not every day do something, materially or otherwise, for economic growth, you lose an opportunity to do a point that day. They used to ask me, why every day? I say, wait for the punchline. For services, general services, whatever, all types of services. If you do not do the same, availability, quality, spread, cost, and all these things, you lose a point. In the home, where we had to bring septic tankers to empty our septic tanks because urbanization moved faster than the government services. So you lose cash in the home, competitive in the business, like with telecommunications, internet, and all this, and you lose government income. And then third, which is more important than all of this, and if you get it right, you fix all the other two, is social services. In many developing countries, Gulf or otherwise, no matter what they tell you, no matter how many buildings they show you with marble and call it all sorts of names around these countries, education also training. And this is an important point, looking back what was not done, in my opinion, in the proper sense. The other thing was health and housing. Many things were thought of as something, there were a lot of other things that, you see, the Gulf countries are similar in so many ways, different experiences in the 20th century. Basically, the political system, their socio-political structure, their social fabric evolved from their own culture. Secondly, a lot of the economic issues were similar, except some had pearling, some had trade, some had location near Iraq, and the activities from India and the steamships when they came, before, after the dhows, etc. Generally, now in Saudi Arabia, there's a huge population in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula that for 1,000 years were outside world activities. In the middle of Saudi Arabia, any foreigners that came before almost the 30s of the 20th century, they used to be called Darawish, from Dervish. These were Sufis, some Sufis, who believed in walking to Mecca for the pilgrimage. And they were known as Darwish, obviously, for the dance and the swirling dervishes or something. And it shows you that we were out of touch. And then we had no schools except in some trading towns or the more advanced Hijaz because of near the Red Sea and Egypt and Europe and the Turkey and the pilgrimage activities from Muslim countries that were connected with colonial powers. The Dutch Bank opened in 1926. So there were, Dutch Bank in Jeddah. But most people, and then we had no schools. I went to the first school in Riyadh. Basically, universal education for boys started in the early 50s that the government did. And then girls 10, 12 years later, almost by force. So we missed out on gradual contact with the world and slow introduction to modern economic development. People worked very hard before.
But we've made a great leap forward, if I can use the term.
Look,
I mean, today, compared to the 30s, when
Zahar,
you go down to Jeddah and Riyadh, we've really advanced.
I'm
not talking about the marble, I'm talking,
Yeah, well, people used to think marble is an indicator. Many countries, and I could be generalizing on many of the issues, except some examples relate to Saudi Arabia where I know. Basically, when the money came, many of these countries went to the international development supermarket, bought the best available, and really to give them credit, they came and installed it on the ceiling. They thought that this fantastic system they bought, the smaller it is, the shinier it is, the more expensive it is, the more, desired, would actually, all they have to do was sit back and it will come and carry them with them. Well, it didn't. You were supposed to put it in and run with its speed and then jump. So there was a gap, which, again, something retrospectively would have been nice if we could have watched that and did something about it, where many of the people who were educated missed out on the work experience. In Europe and the industrial West and the Western democracies, 400 years, and 400 million dead, and 400 wars, while riding the vehicle for technological advance, for scientific advances, for political transformation, social transformation, so it came easy to them. The whole environment, many of my generation, our parents were illiterate. When I was trying to think what to study, when I went to England, I went to a boarding school. And then I was applying to university. I didn't know what I wanted. All I wanted, according to what people told me, was, look, try to get an applied science degree so you get a grade higher in the civil service, when you enter public service.
I heard you got an honors degree.
Well, this is another thing.
Do you care to talk about it?
I certainly wasn't an honor student, but I was an honorable student, I hope. But you see, people are obsessed with certificates, and until now. Now, in England, I don't know if it's still now, but if you go to the red brick universities, not the stone built, the fancy ones, Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, wherever, St. Andrews, you get something called an honors degree. There is grade 1, grade 2-1, grade 2-2, which the English used to call a gentleman's degree, meaning you're not a swot, and you're not an idiot. Then there is a third, and then there is an ordinary, and then a fail. So on it said honors. When I went back, and most of the people around us did not know these things at all, because I was almost maybe the third wave of people who went abroad. They thought I was an honors degree. Now, to be honest with you, I did not resist it too much. To satisfy my conscience, I would attempt to say, no, but let me explain, and then I would stop. So I lived on it for a while. In fact, it helped me in my civil service promotions later.
But as opposed to many others who were parachuted into, let's say, top jobs, you actually went up the ranks in the Royal Commission of Jubail and Yanbu for almost 20 years before you were chairman. So you were one of the rare chairmen who knew what was happening at every level.
I mean, I don't want it to be like a psychoanalysis session. But I was stupid and slow. I should have left and went into business during the boom. I would have been one of your big contributors at Harvard or somewhere.
We still have hope.
No way.
But, Your Highness, I understand that in those days you won was it Sasakawa Prize for the environment?
Well, it was my organization.
Yes, but...
Quickly, when the idea of Jubail Nyamba was worked on, and actually it was extremely courageous decision by the Saudi government. Remember, this is 75. Or actually, they were looking at it from 73, 74. A commitment to gas, to gather gas, cost, the budget was cut from 20 to 12 billion. I don't know if the financial people here could tell me what it's worth now. SABIC was set up with a capital of about $3 billion. The Royal Commission of Jubail and Nyamba was set up to build infrastructure, totally open budget. We brought the best engineering companies. Our chairman at the time, King Fahd, I remember my seniors, I was too junior to, he was my uncle. I'd see him once a week at a dinner or something. But at work, it was totally separate. But my seniors were telling us that he said, bring the best. And not just the equipment, but anything else that comes with it. Andima, or what is Andima in the business sense? Not the hardware, but also the software, meaning policies. Now, he had the Minister of Industry at the time, a very famous poet called Ghazi al-Husaybi. Nobody would know him here now. And he was one of the strongest ministers. He actually took away the petrochemical program from Petromin and Aramco and the Ministry of Oil, and was given to a lot of youngsters in the ministry, and they did a marvelous job. And we wanted to do, as part of get the best systems you can, seawater cooling. Air cooling is very expensive and not very efficient or very suitable ecologically. And seawater cooling was a new concept. Some people have done it on a small scale, a bit in Singapore, a bit in Houston. We actually did the whole canal and the system. Everybody in the government resisted this. It was King Fahd who insisted. We brought the environmental policies. During the Kuwait invasion, when many journalists came to our site on the Gulf in Jubail, and they waited for things to happen, they would ask us, when do you start operating? We had been operating since and exporting since 1982. Not us, my organization, but SABIC. Because they could not smell anything or see any smoke. Now, the reason we won that prize was it is unusual. Normally, the winners would be individuals or organizations that did a lot for the environment and the ecological situation. It is almost impossible, and I can't imagine anybody, maybe in the future there will be, that the host of one of the dirtiest industrial activities would actually win the prize. And it was a total surprise. I lived on it for a while, making myself look I was a great environmentalist. And then, of course, I realized that it's probably not a good idea because I used to get asked to go and speak in environmental things or events, and I did not know all of this.
Well, that was a great achievement. Your Highness, today in the kingdom, we also have a lot of young people in ministries that are working for another leap forward. Would you have 3 or 4 pieces of advice? So based on your experience and hindsight on how we should be handling the way forward? What are the mistakes we shouldn't do again? You mentioned quickly training, human resources, things of this sort. Would you?
Well, I mean, what's happening in Saudi Arabia is a wonderful thing. And the remarkable thing is that they are going to the market and getting all sorts of young people to run things, and government departments. We're getting a bit of a shock because the way government departments work, is not the same as they have worked in the private sector. They're getting people from all walks of life to do very unusual things. My advice is basically to think always, who am I serving? First thing really is, what do people want? Instead of thinking, this was done around the world this way and this way, let's do it. Because particularly in Saudi Arabia, where tourism and hospitality and all these things are not really very big compared to the other activities. Saudi Arabia is a continent, huge, diversified population, spread. Utilities, services are costly because you have to spread them all over. But the potential is tremendous and the resources are fantastic. We were lucky that at the beginning, in the late 70s, because of various problems with the market and the production of Iran, the Saudis ran up, at the end of the 70s, reserves of about 100 billion. Maybe, I don't know, trillion now or something. Some bureaucrats or financial people wanted to invest it outside in long-term investment. And I remember a story about the king at the time, whose background was from the countryside. And when they told them how many, they told them, we have 100 billion now. We should take it, do this and this. He said to them, listen, the biggest sum of money I ever heard was a lakh. A lakh was 100,000 rupees. Because in that part of the country, they were closer to the Gulf and the pearl trade and the links with India, Bahrain, and Kuwait. He says, I don't care what it is, it doesn't leave the country. Of course, they held the usual things in treasury notes and things, reserves, whatever, but it was all spent, and he said, spend it very quickly, because I don't know if all of this is true. Secondly, where do you keep all this money? This sort of, just spend it. We've been 1,000 years hungry. We used to kill for water. We used to fight for food and do it. Luckily, that kept the Saudi development going into the 90s. After the 2 crises, Iran-Iraq, I should say Iraq-Iran, the instigator, and Iraq-Kuwait. The Saudi government, in the space of 7 years, lost well above $200 billion. When the Iraqis started losing battles and we were attacked by the Iranians in May '84, they attacked with aeroplanes. Luckily, they were all shot down, and then help to Iraq, and the whole world was, of course, helping against the strong push by the Iranians. And then after the Kuwait war, Kuwait refugees, the cash to the coalition countries, they didn't do it for our black eyes or brown eyes or black gold or whatever, and direct and indirect costs. We had absolutely nothing. The government was negotiating. The bank that knew Saudi Arabia and did many things with it, JP Morgan, arranged a loan. And things were turned around, 93, 94, and then oil price started to rise. I was told to shut up by this lady.
No, that was addressed to me.
Anyway, I should stop. And if people have any questions?
I have two more questions before people. They're soft, don't worry.
No, you can ask any questions, by the way.
We were talking about the increase in young people in government today. We were talking about everything happening, and there's a lot of movement in Saudi Arabia, and I wanted to hear what you thought of the new ambassador to Washington, who doesn't replace you directly, but who has taken the position you were holding a year ago or so.
Which is wonderful. I mean, fantastic. She's, of course, related. Everybody is my cousin and my niece. I've known her since she was this high.
She's grown since.
She's self-made. I mean, you might joke. She's a princess, and you're self-made. What do you mean self-made? Self-made in the sense of her public life participation. She's one of the group of people who are frustrated by the fact the image is much worse than the reality. She's Western educated, lived with her father, who was a former ambassador for a long time in the States, and she made it herself. I mean, she was talking. She was also pushing the envelope, breaking new ground as a Saudi woman. Of course, maybe it helps sometimes is that you're well known and this, but actually it doesn't matter. People don't believe it. If you are from the family and you think you make a mistake, you'll get away with it. I think recently you've seen proof that it is not that simple.
No, nobody gets away with
it. But she made it by her spirit. She obviously will succeed. It's not easy. I did not, make a brilliant show in Washington, and it's so difficult. In America, you have to cater for a political establishment of 2,000 to 3,000 people, including all academics working on issues to do with the area. The image of the area, no matter how, chummy you appear, or lovey-lovey, as they say, or whatever, with an administration or a secretary of this or secretary of that, they have a very bad image of the whole of the Middle East. And they have dedicated people working there against the Middle East, any country, any issue, no matter how, you can. So the American public, all of this should be worked on. It's not going to be an easy job. But, Rima has this thing you feel coming from inside. It's her personality. And she was appointed for what she conveyed, what she did through herself. And she could have sat down in the background and not appear. She really broke on a lot of... I don't want to go through the examples. There's not much time.
Okay, let's maybe end on a lighter note. You are famous, not to say infamous, for your kitchen. People fight, whether in Washington or in Riyadh, to be invited to your kitchen. Can you tell me about that?
Look, I like to eat a lot, as you can see. I soon will get therapy for this. because I'm getting on and it's causing me many health problems. I've always liked to cook, and it's the ambience. It's really not really an ambience, just an island, and people come and walk around. I always hated classical things, formal things, elegant things, because it's too much hard work. So, and actually somebody once told me, you work in public services like you're cooking. Mixed, open, informal, walk around, let's see, what would you like? It's the ingredients that matter, not how fancy you, or nuclear, whatever, the cuisine or all these things. I'm just too lazy to do elegant things, and people like the informality. In Washington, they came because I was a Saudi ambassador.
Oh, okay.
The Saudi ambassador in Washington was... I started thinking of doing a nice kitchen, a bit like the one we have in Riyadh, but there was really no time and no budget at the time. So I decided, but it is really a nice way to interact with people, and there's no secret about it. Everybody used to think I had a very special thing, or it was very fancy cooking. It's really, I mean, you've been there, but we are friends, and we have few here who come. We enjoy it because we are with our friends. But I have the organic kitchen garden. I've been an activist in organic food. In fact, the only business experience I had after Sagia was I bought a shop for organic food, dry imported. I knew I wasn't going to be a good businessman, but I never realized it was that bad. After 3 years and 3 million riyals, I closed the business. I basically ate half the stock and gave the rest of it.
The only thing I can add is that last time I had the pleasure of inviting His Highness to dinner. Before he arrived, a driver rang at the door and gave me a big bag. Went to the kitchen, opened the bag. There were 15 different kinds of lettuce that are all grown in his organic garden.
I'm sorry, you didn't realize the Swiss chard?
Oh, I think they're all lettuce.
How can you mistake kale for...
Okay.
He didn't like the fact that each of them had different worms. They come with them.
No.
Because it's organic, we can't use things. And you should have eaten them, they're all good protein. You pay $100 for beetles from Peru, and you don't eat local worms?
Anyway, Your Highness, thank you very, very much. I think we'll open it now to the public, with your permission.
Please ask any questions.
I have a few.
Few?
Hello. Yeah, I can. Good afternoon, Your Highness. It's really a treat and very enjoyable to listen to you. Really is good fun, even from last night. Thank you for being on our panel. But I have an important question because our subject is crossroads. Saudi Arabia is doing the 2030 program. And I believe that some of it is footprinting what the UAE has done. How would you compare the two programs of UAE, which has achieved a lot of success, and what Saudi Arabia is about to do for the 2030?
They're obviously different. I think UAE did a wonderful, groundbreaking style of getting things opened up and done. The basics are different, but it's all really the same type of thing. Try to improve the economy, open up, and things like this, and diversify as much as possible. In Saudi Arabia, there were well-established, huge activities in certain things. 2030 basically was really putting targets for people to rise to. And you all know it, and there's another thing that people don't hear so much about, is called the national transformation. And that is to transform the government departments that will manage a lot of these things. And this is also quite important. Now, many people before, when we started Sagia, is they wanted, step by step. only because it's a safer thing. When I mentioned this economic growth, services, social services, why do you have to do something every day? Is because you have a generation born every day. Now, and this is debatable in Saudi Arabia, and you'll see on the internet and others, people taking the opportunities to attack one or two, criticize one or two things that were introduced. In Saudi Arabia also, you have the need for social transformation to match all of these openings and things. Many people think, oh, you should do it slowly, that, oh, no, you cannot bring issues that cause social conflict into the society and this and this. But there are sometimes things you have to do to show people that they can enjoy it, they can benefit from it, and they can respond to it in a positive sense. And this is basically what's been happening. Because you cannot sit and take comfort at a time when people need somebody to lead them into things. Modernization, changes, transformations, and all of this will be criticized all the time. And so far, what's been happening in the last 4 years with this new administration is that it really gave an energy to the market. It gave excitement, it gave hope, and the most important one is in two human areas. One is young people, and of course the most fantastic one is for women. And you should see what is happening with them and all the things that are done. So I think it's positive. You cannot compare Gulf countries. I used to study the way Gulf countries, people were thinking about like development or the economy. And I cannot say this now. It might be seen as criticism to various of our brethren or us. But I used to think, how would they think about this? Maybe privately. If you pay me, I will tell you this.
Another question?
Yeah. Your Highness, here. Yeah, thank you for being so open here today, and that's why I want to ask you this question. I know politicians don't like to discuss predecessors, but I want to go back to Sagia and ask you about the economic cities. 10 years ago, I was deeply involved in marketing and the media plan for the economic cities, and then suddenly it all slowed down, and we didn't hear about them anymore, and there was not a lot of focus on economic cities. What happened there?
Well, I wasn't there. I had left before the idea was born. People were surprised. Many people in the local market thought it was a very ambitious idea, basically good. Maybe people thought the way it was done, the way it was structured, I really don't know. But what's been happening now is the government is basically taking over. They had a loan to try to save the situation arranged before, and now they are pushing it using the old concept. There were a lot of, unfortunate things around it, but the idea is sound. I basically, as I told you in Sagia, I like to have an atmosphere where everybody can do things. And I really believe that the government should regulate well with the participation of those impacted, and then monitor and, of course, get out of the way. And sometimes it doesn't happen, so balanced in a balanced way. Like in so many other things within the market, one thing in the Gulf countries as a whole, no matter what they show you numbers or show you this and that, on food and drug for the public, I don't think enough was done in the past. And people ignore this, they think it is a very boring, it's very important. The protection of public health through proper, not just all they worry about is permits and how many hours they hold it in the airport or the port. There's a lot of things where a lot of people have no awareness. You see, many of us in the region have just not done these things before that have happened as part of a modern economy. Take, for example, the stock market. Most of them were not, the stock market was born out of a need to finance activities, trading activities. Here, everybody, even those that have been ahead of others, this is the place where they invest. You take real estate and financial services. In some markets, they were so controlled, they were so stifled, yet after the boom of the 70s, most of the Gulf, I'm talking general citizens, not special projects or special things, they had liquidity and nowhere to go. They had real estate and it was not well regulated. They were what I call cashiers, basically ministers of finance. They were like, the one who, Amin al-Sanduq, or a cashier. They were running development. People who were handing out, budget this and this, because of other things rather than the issue of development as a whole. So there's so many things we missed out on. Now this is changing. And the economic cities, basically Saudi Arabia as a whole is becoming like an economic city. And it's so interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of these ideas will take a bit of time. For the trickle down, proper trickle down. And even in the middle of all this low income, low oil price, low this, there is something. This is why I said you have to do something every day, not only materially, but otherwise. In Arabic, there's a word ma'nawiyan. I found it very difficult to translate. Do we have any good linguists? When in English, I say materially or otherwise, meaning policies, meaning structures, meaning commitment, statements, and of course the way you do things. Sometimes the way you do things can also give a different impression, but for all Gulf countries, there's nothing they cannot do if it is focused, hard, realistic work with proper targets and where you look at the recipients rather than look at concepts. Concepts are good to entertain, but if they do not relate to the street, they are nothing. You can do buildings, you can do nice things, you can do all sorts. You can go to Mars, stop everything on the ground and take everybody to Mars if you spend enough. But
next question, maybe?
Good afternoon. I was just curious. I'm sure you have daughters as well as sons. And in this particular atmosphere that we have in Saudi Arabia, where I think about 7-8 years ago, they started allowing women to go freely to work and so on. How do you see yourself as a father supporting your daughters to achieve their dreams?
Look, there's something people take about women at work in the Gulf countries or Saudi Arabia in particular. In Saudi Arabia, you would be surprised, even before the fantastic direction we're taking, 30% of the government employees were women in medicine, education. But like my wife, for example, she did English literature, and she did not want to work as a teacher, and she did not want to work as an administrator or receptionist at a hospital. I encouraged her to do retail. And with her cousin and her sister and others, they had a clothes shop. Now, it is the opportunities of work, the free choice. It is for any society, be it here, third world, West, it is almost indecent that you don't have open opportunities for all human beings. In some countries, and unfortunately in Muslim countries recently, over a period, women were targeted by conservative activists using religion for social targets, and later on, of course, they used religion for political things and violent things. But it is important also to realize that for some of them, people do not want to do certain things. That still, even in the most openly participative societies or where women are at the front, some families don't want. Some women don't want. In Saudi Arabia, of course, it was exaggerated by some other factors or regulation that make Saudi Arabia as if it was the Dachau for women in the world. Now, a remarkable thing, Saudi women started 12 years later in education. It was the government from the top that pushed this. There was a lot of resistance. People don't realize. Sometimes your people just don't want certain things. TV was opened against a lot of resistance in 1965. And the idea for TV is that so the Saudis who have been outside world development for a long time would see what is happening around the world. It's not because it is done in Las Vegas or in Macau. It is because it was one method of transforming your people's experience with the outside world.
We had demonstrations on the streets.
Yeah, they used to camp. People from the countryside and the desert, they used to camp around the king's office and complain. Now, the remarkable thing with all the obstacles women faced and the late education, and by the way, Saudi compared with other Gulf countries that did not have the ability to do this, a lot of women were educated. Kuwait maybe was the most advanced with regard to education and jobs for women at the time. But the Saudi women were able to do extremely well. In medicine in particular, what the Saudi, both boys and girls, did extremely well because it was so surprising with people who have never had modern work experience would actually dedicate like almost 12 years. And the government only paid for the education. It was not like some places like Aramco, SABIC, and Royal Commission for Jibali Number, where we spent a lot on training. And we had a lot of engineering backing from all over the world. So the hope is that, again, the general environment and just trying to make life easier for them and work easy. But it's not gimmicky. In some countries, it's a bit gimmicky. In Saudi Arabia, even Saudi Arabia, there are some gimmicky things, but generally, women have proved to be extremely good at work, and now everybody is looking for them, particularly in professional services, as they have proved to be, in fact, if I dare say, Saudi men here.
Actually,
they were much better than
the number
expected.
of Saudi women being employed is increasing exponentially, while the number of men that are unemployed is increasing. They're replacing the men on the workforce. So, Ghulam, please, you had your question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Your Highness. This is a refreshing view on Saudi Arabia. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much for that. I have one last question, if you don't mind. The theme of our conference is about growth opportunity along the Silk Road. And my question to you is this. The friendship between Saudi Arabia and the US goes back to 80 years ago, etc. Is it time to look east instead? Are we looking to make new friendships? Are we looking to shifting the alliances in the next 5-10 years?
It's not a matter of special alliances. These were born out of a reality. Our first introduction to the Western democracies or the big powers was our interaction with the British presence in the Middle East. This is for the third Saudi state and for the present system of government. And it was up and down. There were a lot of doubts and misunderstandings and this, but the Saudis respected the reality around them. Now, the middle part of the Arabian Peninsula was 100% independent because nobody wanted to do anything there. We had nothing to be colonized about. Even the Ottomans did not colonize us. Now, the Americans came first to do with the Christian democracies. For the Saudis, they believed in God, so that was very important. Recognize one of the two other recognized religions. I remember a story, now I'm not sure if it is 100%, but it's likely it was so. When they came and said the Americans want to drill for oil, because the British would not, although it was the same geological formation, because they had enough oil in Iraq, Bahrain, and Iran. So King Abdulaziz turned to his advisors and said, do the Americans also believe in God? They said, yes. He said, okay. Agreement is ready and everything is signed. And this is how it started. The Aramco partners, who owned Aramco until the 70s, took some simple desert workers to the States in the 40s. At that time, looking at the world, we thought, we were totally hopeless. And then these workers were able to study and get to the top universities. And this gave a lot of people hope. So when the government had money later in the 50s, the first thing they did was to send people to the more advanced Arab countries, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. And then when they had a bit more money, they sent them to the States mostly. And this is how the relationship started. When different things were happening Americans never sold weapons outside until 67. And they made the exception to be able to give Israel weapons. It wasn't like a simple security. We never thought of America as a big supporter of the strategic situation in the Middle East and the security of the Middle East until the Soviets or their allies were targeting us. People think that the Saudis have never been people who would sit on balconies, give speeches. It was what the world in the West in particular used to call the progressive Arab states, while we in the Gulf were the backward ones. And
reactionary is the term.
Or reactionary. It's not a matter of this. Our relationship, we've had a number of issues with the United States. Over the years, we blocked oil to the United States in 73 because of what happened to Egypt and aftermath of the 67 war. We had our best relations with the most respectable nations in the world. I think Saudi Arabia is probably the only third world country, and you go back as far as you like, that had been consistently pro the well-known democracies and in the West, the Christian democracies, but other democracies. You look at the ones who are detractors, or even you could call them enemies or people, most of them are not really respected around the world. And this is a track record that's not very not easy when you consider the position.
But Your Highness, today, sorry to interrupt you, our Crown Prince just came back from Pakistan, India, China, Malaysia. There is visiting, let's say, our clients that buy oil and our partners. So there is a push, not away from the U.S., but it's part of our overall relationships.
Yeah, because, it's not a matter of going against. If you go with somebody, they are dealing with them, they are trading with them, we are doing the same. There is no stigma, and this, by the way, the conditions are different, history is different. Things have changed even within those and their foreign relations. We don't get involved in what should this country do about the increasing power of that or whatever, or the differences between them. And this is, again, part of opening up. You open up to the whole world. On security issues, if it had not been for the Gulf countries' relations, Saddam Hussein would have been able to stay in Kuwait and might have gone even all the way down. He would have taken the whole, because he doesn't think like a normal. He was basically a political criminal who got to his head. He showed his muscles around by different things, a reaction to what Sadat did in 77 and the failure of the Camp David in 79, and the whole Arabs were moving. We had a problem with Carter because he wanted Saudi public backing for the Camp David Accord, and we did not agree on the fact that all the details of this autonomy and self-rule and the Palestinians' issues were totally ignored. Both Sadat and Carter wanted to go ahead, and they booked already the loan, and Carter had an election, and the poor Palestinians got lost. The Israelis were very good on the details, and they had lots of supporters, not in the Congress, but within the American negotiating team. So, as the Italians would say,
That's a good way to finish it. Thank you very much, Your Highness. It has been a very enjoyable and interesting
Are we
discussion.
finished now?
I think we are, but we
Next
have to
time-
close. You want another question?
Not you. No, I'm saying next time you should have somebody else other than Zahar interview.
Okay, understood.
Not me, but others. Because he wanted to know everything I was going to say. I said, Zahar, I don't really know. I mean, these are concepts. And he wanted to see me last night and this morning. I said, Zahar, you are stifling my creativity.
Thank you, Your Highness. And thank you, everyone. I mean, if I had a camera with me for TV, I would have like at least 25 questions minimum to ask him and keep going. Thank you very much. This was a very, very interesting session. We will break for lunch now, and then we'll continue today's panels at 2 p.m. Please enjoy your lunch.
اشتغلتي ها هناك؟